Hello everybody and welcome back to Lockdown in Lockdown with me, Alexander Gordon-Smith, or Gordon as most of you know me. It's great to be here. I just want to say a huge thanks to everyone who's commented on this video. Your comments are absolutely lovely. I haven't had time to reply to them yet, but I will. And everyone who's commented on Facebook as well and Instagram. It's really lovely actually to be in touch with you all and to have these conversations with you and to know that so many of you are reading along. So yeah, this is part 4. Part 4, is that right? Part 4. And so Alex, who's introduced himself to us as a bit of a criminal, has broken into a house with his best friend Toby. Toby's been shot and killed. Alex went to court and he's just been sentenced to life without parole in Furness Penitentiary, which, as we're about to discover, is not a very nice place. I do apologise, I should have ironed my shirt, but as we're in lockdown, I just couldn't be bothered. So anyway, I hope you're all okay, and let's crack on. Buried Alive. I'm betting you've all seen some prison films, or watched cop shows where the bad guys get sent to jail. You know what they look like, miles of fences topped with razor wire so sharp it hurts just to look at it. Sprawling grounds watched over at all times by million-watt spotlights and towers with guns. Lifeless buildings that rise up from the ground like great grey tombstones. Tiny windows from which ghostly faces stare at an outside world they can no longer know. Not Furness. Our prison bus took us straight there. Me, the kid who'd been stunned, and 2 other teenage guys, all as pale as church candles and cowering back into our seats as if somehow we could avoid arriving at our inevitable destination. All the while the police guards shook their shotguns at us and jeered, asking us if we'd seen Furness on the newscasts, if we knew what it looked like, if we had any idea of the horrors that lay ahead. I knew. I'd seen Furness on TV like everybody else. After that summer when so many kids had turned to murder, they made sure that everyone in the country got a good look at the prison. They thought it would make us too scared to break the law, too scared to carry knives and to cut people up for just looking at them the wrong way, too scared to take a human life. Looking around, I guess they hadn't been too successful. There had been protesters, of course, the human rights supporters who claimed that locking a child away for life was wrong. But you can only argue with the truth for so long. And that summer, when the gangs rang mild and the streets ran red, everything changed. Even in the eyes of the Liberals, we weren't kids anymore. We were killers. All of us. I used to always think that the waiting was the worst part. But when we rounded a corner and Furness finally came into sight, I knew I'd rather have stayed on that bus for an eternity than get any closer to the monstrosity ahead. It was just like on the news, a towering sculpture of dark stone, bent and scarred like it had been burned into existence. The Black Fort, the way in. The windowless building stretched upwards, its body merging with a crooked spire that resembled a finger beckoning us forwards. Smoke rose from a chimney hidden behind the building, a cloud of poisoned breath waiting to engulf us. All in all, it looked more like something from Mordor than a modern prison. As we neared, I could make out some of the details that the news crews had left out. Carved into the cold stone were vast sculptures designed to inspire fear in anybody who saw them. Tortured statues, each 5 meters tall, showing prisoners on the gibbets, hanging from ropes on guillotines, pleading to executioners, being dragged from loved ones, and, worst of all, a giant head on each corner impaled on a spike. The dead faces watched us, and if I didn't know better, I could have sworn their expressions were of pity. Their sorrowful eyes wet from the gentle rain that fell. "Doesn't look so bad," said one of the other boys, his quivering voice betraying his true feelings. "Well, that ain't the half of it, boyo," replied one of the guards, tapping his shotgun on the window. "That there is Furness's better side. You know where you're going." He lowered his weapon so that it was pointing at the floor. Down. He was right, of course. The building ahead was only the entrance, the gateway to the fiery pits below. the mouth that led to the sprawling guts of Furness, which lay hundreds of metres beneath the ground. I remember when they started building it, I must have been 6 or 7, a different person. How they'd found a crevice in the rock that seemed to go on forever. They'd built the prison inside the hole and plugged the only way out with a fortress. Anyone wanting to dig himself out of this mess only had a couple of miles of solid rock to get through before he was free. I guess that's when it finally sank in. The thought of being down there, underground, for the rest of my life, suddenly hit me like a hammer in the face. I couldn't breathe. My head started to swim. The bile rose in my throat. I sat forward in my seat and stared at the floor, desperately trying to think about something else, something good. But all I could see now were the stains of 100 other prisoners who had thrown their guts up on confronting the reality of their fate. I couldn't hold it back. I puked, the mess hitting the seat in front and causing the guard to leap away. I retched a couple more times, then looked up through blurry eyes, expecting a furious reaction. But they were laughing. "Looks like you win again," said one, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a 10-quid note. "How do you always guess which one's going to hurl first?" "When you've been on the job as long as I have," came the reply, "you just know." There was more, but I couldn't hear it over the sound of the retching and sobbing that echoed back at me from the stained upholstery. When the bus eventually stopped, we were herded out like sheep. I felt like I'd thrown up a couple of vital organs as well as the contents of my stomach, and my legs were so wobbly that I thought I was going to collapse when I stood. But as soon as we were outside, the sensation of rain on my face perked me up a little. Well, it did until I remembered that this might be the last time I'd ever stand in the rain. We were right outside the main gate, in a giant cage that gave off a sinister hum and made my head throb whenever I got too close to the bars. I didn't have to know much about physics to guess that it took a hell of an electrical charge to have that effect. The entrance to Furness was suitably terrifying. 2 enormous black gates topped with a plinth marked with the word "Guilty." As soon as we were lined up, the gate swung open, and with a sound not unlike fingernails running down a blackboard, revealing a grey room with nothing in it except 2 men dressed in black, leaning casually against the walls, and a nasty-looking gun mounted on the ceiling. The men grinned at us and stepped forward. I felt my legs going weak again just at the sight of them, and I wasn't alone. The 3 other boys shuffled away in fear, and even the armed guards moved back towards the bus. "They're all yours," said one of the guards, his voice little more than a whisper. He pulled a palm top from his jacket and held it out with a shaking hand. "If you could just print here." One of the giants in suits strode forward and snatched the device, pressing his thumb against the screen until it bleeped loudly. He watched the armed guards scramble into the bus, then turned his attention to us. I studied his face. With their glinting eyes and their menacing smiles, the men in black all looked the same, but I recognised this one, the mole on his chin letting me know it was the man who had shot Toby. "We told you," he said, placing his hand on the shoulder of the boy beside me, but talking to us all. "You could run, but you couldn't hide. And now here you are, guests of honour at Furness Penitentiary." The other man walked to the front of the line and grabbed the kid by the scruff of his shirt, pulling him forward. "This way," he said, his voice like the sound of continents shifting. We shuffled forward, our steps tiny in the hope that maybe we'd never reach the threshold. It was as the first boy passed through the doors that the second, the same guy who I'd seen stunned at the court, suddenly made a break for it. He pounced to the side and stepped backwards, all the while looking at the men guarding us. "You framed me!" he shouted, his face twisted into a mask of anger and fear. "I didn't kill anybody, and now I'm spending the rest of my life in this nightmare. I won't let you do it." The 2 men started laughing, their thunderous peals echoing off the stone walls. Then, in the blink of an eye, the one to the right of me burst across the dusty ground and with a mighty crack sent the boy flying towards the fence. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed the speed of the man. He'd moved so fast he'd left traces in the air like sparklers on a summer night. The boy hit the floor and rolled, ending in a crumpled heap perilously close to the electrified bars. "You wouldn't be the first one to fry on that cage," said the man, walking until he stood over the boy. "But it's a shame to waste you on something as quick and painless as the barbecue." He reached down and picked the boy up by his collar like a bear scooping up a ragdoll, then carried him back to the line. The kid had a bloody lip and a dazed expression, like he'd just been hit by a freight train, yet somehow he was managing to stand. He lowered his eyes to the floor, but I saw him flash the man a murderous look as soon as his back was turned. "Now that little rebellion is out of the way, I hope you realise just how serious this is," said the first man, walking to the front of the line and ushering us forwards. "This is a private institution, sanctioned by the government, which means that we now own you. You have been sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole. So, short of a revolution in the country, or an act of God, you will die here. Not that God would ever mess with furnace." I faltered as I reached the threshold, staring at the line that separated the ground outside from the polished stone of the room ahead. It was just one more step, but it was the last one I would take as a free person. With a shuddering sigh, I lifted my leg and planted my foot down on the other side of the wall. It might have just been my imagination, but the sound of that footstep seemed to reverberate around the room, a death knell, mourning a lost life. "As you can see, the manner of your death isn't important to us," the man continued, guiding our group through the featureless room towards a metal door in one wall. "Of course, the state has no death penalty, but any attempt at escape will be dealt with using lethal force." The door opened to reveal a long corridor ahead, as featureless as the room we'd just left. I cast one final look behind me, catching a glimpse of dark cloud through the main gates before they slammed shut. It was a fleeting image, but one I will never forget. "There's no one you can cry to, no one you can beg to. The public have judged you and found you guilty. As far as they are concerned, you are already dead." The corridor ended with another door, this one guarded by a third man, also in black. He nodded to his colleagues as he unlocked the gate and winked a silver eye at us as he waited for it to slide open. We passed through, finding ourselves in a small room with a hole in one wall. "Line up and take your prison uniforms," the man continued. "One each, then go through that door for purging." We obeyed. What choice did we have? One by one we walked by the hole in the wall, and from the shadows we were past a pair of paper shoes, underwear that felt like sandpaper, and a hunk of stiff, striped cloth that was better suited to holding potatoes than for wearing. The white uniform was branded with the furnace symbol, 3 circles arranged in a triangle, a dot in the middle of each, and thin lines joining them. I followed the boys in front through the door to find another room, this one full of tiny cubicles. "Get in, strip and wash," came the booming voice behind us. I picked a door, left my new uniform on the shelf outside and entered. There were directions on the wall and I followed them, taking off my clothes and placing them into a chute where they vanished from sight. Shivering in the cold, I pressed a large red button in front of me and was instantly hit by a fist of freezing water. I doubled over, pressing myself against the wall to avoid the stream, but the cubicle was too small and I had to endure it for what felt like an eternity. When the spray stopped, I followed the instructions again and held my breath while a cloud of gas was pumped in. It stung my eyes and my skin, and even after the directed 30 seconds, when I took a gasping breath, the gas still flooded my lungs, making my chest feel like it was on fire. Staggering out of the door, I put on my uncomfortable uniform and watched as the other 3 boys emerged from their cubicles, each one red-eyed and coughing. We looked like phantoms haunting the room where we died, which wasn't too far from the truth, I guess. His malicious grin as wide as ever, the man steered us across the room to a set of elevator doors. He whispered something into his collar, and seconds later the doors opened, revealing a machine gun on the ceiling of the elevator car, which swung around to face us. "This is where we part company, for now," he said. "This elevator will take you all to your cells. Don't try anything funny or you'll end up decorating the walls." He pushed us forward with his massive hands, and we entered the cabin, the remote turret following our every move. "It's quite a ride down to the bowels of the earth," he said as the doors began to close. "So I hope none of you are claustrophobic." Then he was gone, and with a deafening whir of gears, the armoured elevator began its descent to the darkness at the bottom of the world. Not good. Just remember, I didn't even bring a cup of tea up with me. No tea. What am I going to do? Okay. Next chapter. The Descent. That noise is my chair, by the way. It's not me. For the first minute or so, none of us spoke. We didn't even look each other in the eye. It was a strange mix of emotions. There was fear, of course, so thick you could almost smell it, beyond the stink of dust and oil. But there was also something else. I guess it was pride. If we acknowledged each other, then we were also acknowledging our own helplessness, our own panic. And after what we'd just been through, nobody wanted to do that. In the end, it was me who broke the ice. "I just want to get this out in the open," I said above the sound of the elevator's descent. "I didn't kill anyone. They framed me, they shot my friend, and they set me up for the fall. I'm not a killer." Gradually, the other three boys raised their heads, and for the first time we all got a good look at each other. "Join the club," said the kid who I'd seen in court. He was shorter than me, but wider, his body tensed like a cat that's puffed up its fur. He brushed a strand of untidy dark hair away from his face and cast a nervous gaze up at the machine gun in the ceiling. "Those guys in black drove a car into some old woman. They killed her. They knew everything about me. They got my prints onto the wheel. They knew I wouldn't have an alibi that night or any way of proving I didn't do it. Name's Z, by the way." "Z?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. The question brought a brief smile to his face. "Got 4 older brothers and sisters. Mum was adamant that I was the last one, so she called me Z. What about you?" "Alex," I replied. I looked at the 2 other kids. They were the complete opposite of each other. One resembled a beanpole, his uniform hanging off him like rags on a scarecrow. The other had probably eaten a few too many chocolate bars in his time, but his green eyes were sharp and his gaze fierce. "Jimmy," said the beanpole, hoisting up his trousers. "Yeah, I didn't kill nobody either. Same story as you, Alex. They murdered a friend of mine. Stabbed him, though." We all turned to look at the other kid. For a minute, it seemed like he was going to cry. Then his expression hardened, and with his fists clenched, he spat out 2 words that sent chills down all of us. "My sister." There was still no sign of the elevator stopping. It might just have been a psychological trick to make us feel like that we were going deeper than we were, but I doubted it. It takes a long time to travel a mile underground. "Are you saying they framed us all?" asked Z, shaking his head. "It doesn't make any sense. Why would they do it?" "Maybe they've got cells to fill, targets to reach," suggested Jimmy, but his tone of voice made it clear he didn't know. None of us did. Not then. "Listen," I said, certain that the elevator car was bugged and motioning for the other boys to come closer. "Whatever happens in there, whatever they've got in store for us, we've got to stick together, right?" "I've got your back," said Z. "I'm getting out of here, no matter what." "The only way you're getting out is in a coffin," hissed the kid who'd lost his sister. "Haven't you heard about this place? There is no way out." "Well, I'm with you guys," said Jimmy, ignoring the remark. "Ain't no way I'm spending the rest of my life in this hole." The noise of the elevator shifted pitch, and with a bone-breaking shudder, it came to a halt. Before the doors could open, however, there was one last hate-filled remark from the corner of the cabin. "We're all going to die in here." The moment the elevator doors opened, my senses came under attack. I can describe what I saw when I stepped out into Furnace, but I can't tell you how I felt. I was so overloaded by what lay before me that I'm sure part of my brain shut down just so it wouldn't overheat. It was like a survival mechanism to stop me going insane. I took in the details, but they didn't register on any emotional scale. The elevator had taken us to the very depths of the prison, a stretch of bare stone that was easily the size of a soccer field. And above us, for as far as we could see, lay its tortured, twisted interior. Furnace certainly deserved its name. The walls were made from the very rock of the earth, their surfaces rough and red, and the half-light of the room made them flicker as if they were on fire. The sunless yard was vast and circular, and arranged in rings around the outside were countless cells, the grey metal platforms and jagged staircases resembling a rib cage against the fleshy walls. I stared at the elevator shaft, which rose in a relentless line above our heads, the top barely visible where it entered the red rock of the ceiling, broken only by a giant video screen hanging over the doors. The elevator was the only way in or out, and there was absolutely no other means of getting back up. The hiss of pneumatics snapped my attention back to the walls beside us, and I saw 2 more machine guns protruding from the rock like black limbs. They trained their sights on us as we staggered from the elevator into the vast chamber, each with an unblinking red eye that seemed to assess our every move. I wondered whether there was a human at the other end of the controls, or whether some dark robotic intelligence had its finger on the trigger, ready to fire at the smallest sign of trouble. I couldn't decide which would be worse. I was so overawed by the prison itself that it took me a while to notice it was full of people. They swarmed across the courtyard in front of us, mostly kids about my age, some a little older, and even a couple who looked like they should still be in middle school. Some hung out in groups, their stares and swaggers a clear message that they were in charge. Others hung back in the shadows or peered over the bars of the platforms, all sickly faces and baggy eyes. Most were staring at us, some laughing and shouting, "New fish!" Others shaking their heads in compassion. Their gaze made my cheeks burn, and I lowered my head so nobody would see. It didn't take long for a few of the kids to step forward, but it was pretty clear that they weren't a welcoming party. Each of the 6 boys wore a black bandana with a crude picture of a skull painted on the front. It would have been laughable if they didn't all look as though they were about to make us walk the plank. Let me guess, I said, starting to speak before I even knew I was doing it. You're in here for piracy? I heard Z snigger to my side, but there wasn't even a hint of a smile in the pock-marked faces before me. One of the boys, not the biggest but by far the ugliest, stepped right up to me, so close that I could see the dirt clogging his paws. "Get this straight from the start, new fish," he said, jabbing me in the chest with a filthy fingernail. "You're on our turf now, so you take orders from me." My heart was pounding so hard it felt like something inside me was about to burst. I tried meeting his glare with one of my own, and was holding up pretty well until I suddenly started thinking that this was how the kids at school must have felt when Toby and I had pressed them for money. Powerless, furious, ashamed. The thought washed through me like acid, and my head dropped. Looking back, that little moment of self-realisation probably saved my life. I've seen the skulls kill people for nothing more than standing up to them. "You all belong to me," the kid continued, speaking slowly and emphasising each word by prodding us one by one in the chest. "No getting away from that. You're all skull fodder now." Z started to say something. It sounded like it was going to be a witty comeback, but fortunately for him, he was interrupted by the sound of a siren. It was deafening, cutting through my head and reverberating up the steep walls of the prison until the echoes died out near enough 20 seconds later. By that time, the boys had backed away, joining the rest of the inmates who were flooding towards the centre of the giant courtyard. I noticed a yellow ring painted onto the floor and wondered whether we should be heading towards it too. But it was too late to move. The siren rang out again, and a metal door the size of a bus to the left of the elevator began to hiss and rumble, mechanisms inside grinding and turning as they released a series of locks. With a blast of steam, the vault door swung open lazily on its enormous hinges, revealing a sight that I knew there and then I would take with me to my grave. The guards came out first. 3 of them, all in black suits and all holding shotguns in their massive fists. They strolled from the steam-filled corridor beyond like they were going for a walk in the park, their silver eyes full of cold humour. They made me nervous, no doubt about it, but that wasn't what filled me with terror. Behind them came 2 more figures that looked horribly familiar. Their stunted bodies covered by leather overcoats, their shriveled, pasty faces concealed by ancient gas masks that wheezed noisily. They were almost lost in the shadows of the guards as they twitched and shook their way out, but their black eyes, which looked as lifeless as the lumps of coal in a snowman's face, never left us. I recalled the first time I'd met one of these monstrosities, the way it had picked Toby to die without the slightest trace of emotion. I felt anger well up inside me, but I was powerless to do anything about it. Besides, it wasn't even these freaks who made the scene ahead so horrific. It was the man who walked out after them. At first glance, he seemed like an ordinary guy in his 40s, pretty tall, very lean, dark hair, and a clean grey suit. But the more I studied him, the more I realised there was something very wrong with the way he looked. His face was too angular, the skin pulled tight against the bone beneath like he was a skeleton dressed in someone else's flesh that looked more like leather when it caught the light. The weird thing was that I tried looking him in the eye, but I simply couldn't do it. My gaze just bounced off, like there was some kind of force field around his face. I know that sounds stupid, but I can't think of any other way to describe it. Whenever I looked him right in the eye, I found myself staring at something else instead. His chin, his suit, the wall. I mean, what the hell was that about? The cherries on the sick cake that lay before me, the sight that really struck fear into my heart, were the 2 creatures who trotted out after their master. If the devil had dogs, it would be these. They were huge, bigger than Irish wolfhounds, their heads easily level with my shoulders. The creatures glistened in the red light of the prison, and it took me a while to work out why. When I realised, I almost threw up my guts again. They didn't have any skin. Their slick bodies were made up of muscles and tendons that bulged in plain view, throbbing gently with the beating of their hearts. As they moved, you could see their insides working, the muscles stretching, then contracting, finally tensing when the group came to a halt. Their faces, too, were entirely devoid of fur, 2 silver eyes embedded into their flesh and glaring at our group like we were dinner. I took an involuntary step back, but stopped dead when the dogs started growling. "It doesn't take long to learn obedience in this place," came a voice so gravelly and deep that for a second I thought it was being broadcast directly into my skull. But the man with the dogs was moving his mouth, so I assumed the words came from him. "And obedience is the difference between life, death, and the other varieties of existence on offer here in Furness." The man stepped forward, his dogs trotting by his heels. "Obey my rules and you'll do just fine. Disobey them and you'll soon learn that here your nightmares exist on the same plane as you. They stalk the same corridors and haunt your cells. It's only me that stands between you and insanity. Anyway, where are my manners? My name is Warden Cross, and I run this institution. I know who you are, and I know your crimes, but here everybody is guilty. So we do not judge you by the paths you took, only by the way you choose to live in this prison." He stopped a short distance before us, and I could swear the temperature dropped several degrees. I don't know why, but I started to think of him as a black hole, like he sucked all the life and warmth and goodness from whatever was nearby. The closer he got, the more it felt as though something was being wrenched out of my body. I squirmed in discomfort, beads of sweat forming on my forehead. "You've already broken the first and most important rule of Furness," the warden went on. "But since you didn't know it, I guess we'll excuse you this once."
When the siren sounds, you must be either in your cell or in the yellow circle in the yard. Anyone breaks that rule, then I cannot guarantee their safety."
He gestured at the guns on the wall.
"It's a precautionary measure, you understand."
I didn't, but I kept mum.
"If you hear one long blast on the siren, then you must get to your cells. That means lockdown. And that's when things turn nasty, if you're left outside."
This time he nodded at his dogs, which began to drool messily on the stone floor.
"There are, of course, other codes of conduct, and you will all have plenty of time to become acquainted with them. But let's get you settled in. I mean, we're not monsters."
His face erupted into a crooked smile.
"Well, not all of us."
One of the men in black handed the warden a sheet of paper, and he studied it for a moment.
"Z. Hatcher," he read. "Prisoner number 2013832. Your cell is D24, 4th level. Cellmate Carlton Jones."
There was a shuffling from the crowd of inmates, and a small red-headed boy stepped to the edge of the yellow circle. He nodded nervously in the direction of the warden, then motioned for Z to approach him. I watched him go, feeling like I'd been robbed of my best friend, even though we'd only just met.
"Montgomery Earl,"
the warden continued, looking at the doughy kid.
"Prisoner number 2013833, cell number E15, 5th level. Cellmate Kevin Arnold."
"Hell no!" came a voice from the crowd. It was the ugly kid, dressed like a pirate. Oh, I felt my heart sink for poor Montgomery. I knew exactly what life would be like for him, paired with that thug. The warden glared at Kevin, and the boy stopped his protests, muttering something to the other skulls who stood nearby.
"Better get moving," the
warden said. Montgomery trotted off towards the yellow circle, but I couldn't watch to see what happened.
"Alex Sawyer, prisoner number 2013834. Cell number F11, 6th level. Cellmate Carl Donovan."
I looked over at the crowd, but nobody came forward.
"I said Carl Donovan!"
the warden hissed, his leathery face creasing in displeasure. Gradually, a tall, well-built kid, a little older than me, stepped forward, pushing past the people in front of him and staring at me like I was something his cat had coughed up. I ran a hand through my hair, then walked slowly across the uneven stone. The warden was dishing out a cell to Jimmy, but I wasn't really listening. "Hey," I said meekly when I reached the boy who I'd been living with for God only knew how long. He looked down his nose at me and just snorted, then turned and started walking back through the crowd. Behind me, I heard the warden shout out across the courtyard.
"Beneath heaven is hell, boys. Beneath hell is furnace. I hope you enjoy your stay."
And there we go. Ooh, it's getting scary. I hope you have a nice weekend. I will see you tomorrow for the next chapter, Settling In. I'm sorry about my voices, by the way. I'm not very good at voices. But anyway, I hope you're enjoying it. Have a great day. Stay safe, and I'll see you soon. Thank you.